with the leadership change on May the 20th, have already said that the governance capability of the Taiwan authorities should not go down compared to during his office time. Ms. Lei, what do you expect might happen? What exactly should be the standards?
Well, there are different kinds of warning signs to Tsai Ing-wen, hoping that there will not be major changes, especially with respect to the cross-strait relations. Ma Ying-jeou's last days in the office has been widely praised, especially in terms of his position taken on the territorial disputes with Japan. So he is enjoying about the highest level of approval rating in his second term. So as such, he is a bit more bold in terms of giving advice to his successor, Tsai Ing-wen.
That is very true. If we take a look at this chart, the recent ratings of Mr. Ma Ying-jeou, the current leader of Taiwan, of course, he's likely to step down on May the 20th. Instead, Ms. Tsai Ing-wen is going to come into office. Take a look at this graphics of his administration, Mr. Ma, a jump of 7% from a year ago, hitting 23%. It is also the highest in his second term so far. Ma's predecessor, Chen Shui-bian's rating was at 13% at the end of his 8 years in power in the year 2008, nearly 10% lower than Ma's. So that's quite a comparison over there. Of course, this is quite a number for Mr. Ma Ying-jeou, who had suffered from low ratings over the past few months, if not a few years. Having said that, though, Mr. Zhong, there are a number of issues, it seems, that Mr. Ma mentioned. One is the protection of the Taiwan fishermen. Back in 2008, the Japanese Coast Guard vessel hit the Taiwan fishermen's ships, and the Taiwan fishermen were caught. And Mr. Ma Ying-jeou since then expanded the Coast Guard input financially and tried to expand as much as possible its capability to protect the fishermen. Will Ms. Tsai follow the same suit? If she's not, what would that mean? What kind of message is that going to send?
I sincerely hope Tsai Ing-wen would follow Ma Ying-jeou's standard, would follow Ma Ying-jeou's practice. But in reality, I'm a little bit pessimistic since Tsai Ing-wen has tried to set up a good relationship with Japan. So maybe she has to make some compromise. So maybe in future, Tsai Ing-wen would not follow Ma Ying-jeou's standard. Still, maybe publicly she will say she will try to protect the interest of Taiwan fishermen. But in reality, maybe she will make, and privately, she will make compromise to Japan.
I see. That's an interesting thing. Another interesting thing, Ms. Lei, I have to go to you because this is really something very critical about the territorial disputes regarding the Nansha Islands. One of those islands is now actually controlled by Taiwan, that is called the Taiping Island. And in Mr. Ma's administration, he was stepping onto the island itself and tried to make sure the world understands this. And now, also under his term, the government in Taiwan authorities is actually asking the International Tribunal of Arbitration, their arbiters, to come to the island to take a look at it in order to get to know the facts. And Taiwan authorities are saying at this moment, if they are not doing the same thing as the Taiwan has already invited them to do, then Taiwan is not going to recognize whatever decision that the arbiters is likely to come out as suggested by the Philippines. So what about under Ms. Tsai during her term? What kind of balance is she likely to take?
Well, I think you're very clear in stating that Ma Ying-jeou actually made 3 very strong moves. One is declaring Taiping Island is habitable island, invited international reporters, including CNN reporters, to visit the island. The second one was personally going to Pengjiayu, which is extremely close to Diaoyutai Islands. Japan would call it the Senkaku Islands. And the third position he took was about the Okinatori, the small little atoll that Japan calls it an island and declare the exclusive economic zone. And Ma Ying-jeou made it very clear that it's international waters, and he also sent voyages to protect our fishermen. all three moves were extremely bold. All three moves were never made during Chen Shui-bian's leadership during the first 2000 to 2008 DPP administration. So if we look at Tsai Ing-wen, if he were to adhere to the old DPP position, DPP seems to have ceded the territorial disputes to Japan, and also in some ways giving them a softer protest than Ma Ying-jeou has done during his first term, and definitely not as strong as what he's done recently. So Tsai Ing-wen, though she has cleared and claimed that the sovereignty is a non-disputable issue, I suspect that she would follow Chen Shui-bian's first term and do a slightly softer protest against Japan, which is consistent with DPP's position, especially because they try to appease Japan and try to build really strong relationship and alliance with Japan.
All right, one is territorial disputes, the other is the fishermen's safety issue, and of course it is the economy, isn't it? I mean, every election, even in local territories, is about the economy. So let me come back to you, to Mr. Paal, because one of the issues during Mr. Ma Ying-jeou of the Kuomintang's time in Taiwan over the past 8 years has a lot to do with the deal with the United States. It's the import of beef. There were certain chemicals being used in the beef, and there was big uproar on the island against that. And at the time, DPP was very much so-called with everybody, quote unquote, and against this import. But eventually, when DPP now about to come into the power, they say, well, this is not important anymore. Let's just go with whatever import we have. So is that going to be the trade relations, a demonstration of the DPP's stance with the U.S.?
Well, what I've heard from the people who will have a prominent role in the DPP administration is that they are going to take a more pragmatic approach to trying to resolve the technical difficulties in getting to open imports of beef and pork, especially pork, from American producers. The problem lies essentially in Taiwan, where the Taiwan pork producers are weak competitors internationally. They've had a persistent strain of hoof and mouth disease, and they don't want to open themselves to outside competition because they don't have the best products available. So the type DPP approach is raise the quality of the environment, make the cattle, the pigs healthier, and then get into competition. That won't happen overnight. That's a few years project. But at least it sounds to the ears of American trade negotiators as a more pragmatic and step-by-step approach than simply not negotiating.
Pragmatic or compromises? Ms. Lei?
Well, certainly in all the discussions, both in Ma's administration and the incoming Tsai administration, they've claimed that U.S. pork and beef will be our ticket to TPP. And they've used this to tell the pork producers locally that it is a necessary, quote unquote, evil that we allow the American pork to come to the island. I think DPP has made it very clear that they will follow Kodak and probably will gradually easing up the opening of U.S. pork to the island. However, if you all recall, it was a big uproar last time around when Ma Ying-jeou's government tried to do the same thing, and lots of street protests happened. So it is certainly a very major issue and still will be a very thorny issue for Tsai Ing-wen to navigate through. However, their position seems to be rather clear.
If the import of the beef and pork is already a big issue, then what a big issue that would be if it is really the trade and economic ties between Taiwan and the mainland. Ms. Lei, at this moment, Taiwan is enjoying huge trade surplus with the mainland. That's a rare phenomenon among any economic entities in the world today. But if 1992 consensus, which the mainland is regarding as a key principle document, not being recognized clearly by the DPP, at least by Ms. Tsai and the current to be thrown in authorities in Taiwan, what's likely to happen to this trade relations from the Taiwan perspective? Ms. Lei.
Well, Actually, that is why Taiwan businessmen are quite nervous. If you look at all the trade organizations as well as chambers of commerces, they all warned the DPP government that there are certain condition precedent in terms of our cross-strait relations, especially with the economic ties. And it is important to know that Taiwan and mainland China not only is a very strong trade partner, Taiwan has a strong dependency in mainland China, but it is not a bilateral relationship. It's in the global context. In other words, Taiwan export to mainland China or import from mainland China has to be put into the context of globalization. It is part of global supply chain. It is not bilateral. And Tsai Ing-wen's government will have to deal with the fact that it is not just a bilateral issue, is a globalization issue. And also, Taiwan also enjoy visitors from mainland China. It's the #1 source of visitors. So Tsai Ing-wen has to date declined to talk about 92 consensus, which seems to be a condition precedent laid out by mainland China, and everybody is bracing themselves to see whether she'll make any mention, if not directly on 92 consensus, but to the spirit of 92 consensus, so that mainland China and Taiwan can continue to enjoy its current trade relations.
And what about you, from your perspective, Mr. Paal? What do you make of the reluctance at this moment, at least, for Ms. Tsai to abide by the 1992 consensus, which clearly regards Taiwan and the mainland belongs to one China? That seems to be the very principle that both sides at times holds very dear. So what do you make of this? Will she be able to make that clear during the so-called inauguration speech on the 20th? If not, what kind of message is she trying to send to Beijing?
Well, I think it's going to be an ongoing test of wills. She has a long-standing record of not accepting the 92 consensus, and I don't expect that she ever will. The question is on the part of the mainland. China wants her to go all the way to accept that principle and the one China principle, and she doesn't want to do it for her own political purposes. So the two sides will be testing each other and try to find whether there's a middle ground where, as she says, she can maintain the status quo going forward, not suffer economic or other reversals, while withholding final statement utterance of the 92 consensus or one China principle. China needs that because it wants to have the reunification prospects retained, at least in theory, going forward with the new administration. An early test of this will be the invitation that has been extended from the World Health Organization for Taiwan's medical health minister to attend the World Health Assembly. The Chinese conditioned the invitation this time on acceptance of the 92 communique and one China principle as embodied in the UN General Assembly's resolution. And I suspect there's going to be a credentials fight at the 2016 World Health Assembly just a few days after the inauguration, if China does not hear in the inaugural speech what it wants to hear. So we're going to start to see the two sides rubbing against each other pretty soon.
I see. It's very interesting. Mr. Paal used the phrase, the willingness.
Yeah.
I think there's a phrase in English language, isn't it? There's a will, there's a way. If Ms. Tsai is having the willingness to do it, there must be a way to do it, despite the party politics inside Taiwan. Mr. Zhong, let me come back to you.
Yeah.
Talking about the mainland, what does the mainland have in mind, expecting that May the 20th speech of Ms. Tsai? And also, we've already seen, if I could just line up a few things, tourism to Taiwan from the mainland been dropping down 4.2 million last year, and now is not yet 4 million. It's about something 3.8 million. And we have also seen the trade, business people on both sides of the streets are quite nervous at this time. And not to mention that the people-to-people exchanges across the Taiwan Strait, people are all waiting for the messages. So what exactly is the mainland expecting? What about 1992 consensus? If Ms. Tsai did not mention that in the so-called inauguration speech, so what would that mean to the mainland, and how would the mainland react? Of course, you're not coming from the Taiwan Affairs Office, but I'm sure from your perspective, you can help us to understand better from the mainland's perspective.
Okay. Of course, the Chinese mainland sincerely wish Tsai Ing-wen could accept or recognize 1992 consensus as the core meaning, that is one China principle. But from the phenomena now, it seems quite difficult for her to propose 1992 consensus several days later. If Tsai Ing-wen could not accept 1992 consensus, maybe she could propose some other consensus which the core meaning of which is one China principle, for example, 2016 consensus or something like that. If Tsai Ing-wen could propose this kind of consensus, maybe then could be accepted by Chinese mainland. If Tsai Ing-wen neither accept 1992 consensus nor propose new consensus, then maybe the Chinese mainland will not accept her idea. Then maybe the exchange between the two sides, I mean the top level of the official level maybe will become dropping down, and some trade cooperation or economic cooperation maybe will decreasing, and as you just said, the common people exchange will also decreasing.
One final round of question before we go. One important thing is what would happen, and the attitudes from all sides. Defense, for example, it's very likely, Ms. Lei, that Ms. Tsai is going to propose spending more on the so-called defense, especially arms sales from the U.S. to Taiwan, even though we all know those arms sales are not necessarily updated categories, rather a big favor from Taiwan for U.S. businesses. But what would like to happen, and can the constituencies on Taiwan Island agree with that kind of deal and even expansion of that kind of deal?
Well, again, drawing an analogy with Chen Shui-bian's administration, if you all recall, when Chen Shui-bian first got onto the office, he proposed a 610 billion NT dollar arms acquisition from the United States. Tsai Ing-wen has already established a southbound office, meaning that she will have a southbound approach in terms of international participation, in which she'll try to establish stronger relationship, especially with Japan and the United States. So both in terms of arms sales and all kinds of potential alliances and cooperations with the United States and Japan will certainly be top on her list in her first term.
I see. And Mr. Paal, arms sales even more this time, since she's already very happy with a bigger bill?
I think that's likely to be the case, and moreover, we'll have a new American administration in the first part of 2017, and normally when new administrations come in, they look for an opportunity to discharge what they see as their responsibility to make sales of new types of equipment to Taiwan early in the administration before the connections with the PRC begin to get in the way of making that kind of decision later on. So I think the cards are in place for some kind of substantial arms sale. Possibly at the end of the Obama administration, more likely at the beginning of whoever the next president is.
And Mr. Zhong, here in Beijing, China, the mainland has always been against the arms sales from the U.S. to Taiwan regarding the safety across the Taiwan Strait and security. What is, once again, the fundamental issue in this?
The fundamental issue is highly related to the Chinese sovereignty and territorial integrity. So if the United States continue to send arms sales to Taiwan, then it highly intervene Chinese territorial integrity and sovereignty. So the United States should stop this kind of activity to protect the relationship between the U.S. and China.